Thank you very much for tuning in. This is Dr. Sean Yoder, and this is EC202. Today we are doing Chapter 6, National Income Accounting. So before we start the chapter, I just want to say congratulations, you survived the first exam. Hope you did well. If you have any questions, please call me during office hours or give me a call or send me an email. We'll try to get you sorted. But otherwise, congratulations and LLZ. So we are in macroeconomics, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we measure the income of a country. Now, the National Income and Product Accounts is data compiled by the United States government by the Bureau of Economic Analysis. The website is a BEA, Bravo Echo Alpha.gov. Great website, part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. When they say there are literally thousands of variables, they are underselling it. Hundreds of thousands, definitely, potentially millions of variables in there that they collect all the time. So the first piece of information we need to talk about is gross domestic product. Now I'm going to be on the slide for a while working you through this. Gross domestic product. The total market value of all final goods and services produced within a given period by factors of production located within a country. That's a lot. Now I want you to get gross domestic product is intended to answer or try to answer one question. Are we better off? Now there are two kind of ways of asking that question. The first is, are we better off now than we were insert time, 1950s, 1980s, 4 years ago, 2 years ago, whatever. The other way of asking that question is, are we better off here than they are in Canada, Mexico, the superpower of Gabon, or Australia, Ireland, wherever? So one is temporal, intertemporal, or times, differences between time. The other is longitudinal, or differences between space. Okay. So GDP is the total market value. So pause right there. Market value. Market value means there is a price involved. That's important. That means there's a price involved. Which price and when is critical because prices change all the time. We'll talk about that in a minute. Of all final goods and services. So let's stop for a second. Final goods and services. So we need to make a distinction between a final good and service and what's called an intermediate good and service. So I drive a car. Those of you who drive a car, you have tires on your vehicle, right? Now, if I go to Les Schwab or Costco or any number of places and buy tires and have them put on my car, that is a final good and service, right? I am the final consumer of those tires. Now, I may resell the car or resell the tires, but those are used. It's not new. So a final good and service is new. However, if you take those exact same tires and sell them to Subaru, Toyota, Ford Motor Company, and they put those tires on a new car, they don't count in GDP. They're called intermediate goods because they're included in the price of the new car. So you don't double count. So final goods and services is not so much an attribute of the good or the service itself. It's an attribute of who is buying it and why. It's an attribute of who is buying it and why. Okay, final goods and services versus intermediate. We'll call that good. All right. So we will clear that. Produced within a given period. All right. Remember a moment ago, I said there was a price. So earlier in the term, I talked about these ugly Christmas sweaters, right? And ugly Christmas sweaters, and okay, great, they don't sell at Christmas, they get marked down. What happens after New Year's when they still don't sell? Right? So we got these new ugly Christmas sweaters in 2020. Come Christmas 2020, they're not going to sell. Come January 1st, 2021, of course, they're going to get marked down further. And the price we're going to end up using is the price they finally sell for in 2021. But it doesn't matter when it's sold. It matters when it was made. So the sweaters that were made in 2020 count in 2020, even though they were sold in 2021. It doesn't matter when it was sold. It matters when it was made. You got me? Got it. Factors produced in a given period by factors of production located within a country. Now this one's tricky. A lot of people have trouble with this one. So, has anybody ever flown internationally before? I do a lot. So last time I went to China, oh, that was a long flight. Flights like that, man, you measure in number of movies on the flight, not how many hours it is, because you lose all sorts of time. So I landed in Beijing, and you go through the tunnels. You're thankful to be off that airplane. You go through the tunnels, you go through everything, and then you get through immigration. Oh, immigration in China was hilarious. They had little buttons. How happy are you with your immigration experience? You know, you get through immigration. They admit you to the country. Then you get your bags, and then you got to go through customs. And this last time I went to China, I had an entourage with me, I had a bunch of people, and most of these people had never traveled internationally before. So clearly they ran afoul of everything in customs and got piled up in a line, whereas I just jetted right through and everything's great. And once you clear customs, usually there's this requisite sliding glass door, and once you step up to the door, the door opens. About 3-4 feet past the door is this rail, and then behind the rail are these guys holding the signs that say, Mr. Smith, blah, 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 right? Where people are there to meet you. So I walked through the door opened, I walked on the other side of the door closed behind me. In front of me is the railway and the people holding the signs, and then right above their heads was a business sign. Can anybody guess what sign that was? It was Starbucks, of course it was Starbucks. So what did I do while I was waiting for all the geniuses who got caught at customs and were trying to get through customs? I went to Starbucks and had a cup of coffee. After all, it had been hours since I had my proper caffeine injection. Now, Starbucks is a company headquartered in Seattle area. It is traded on the NASDAQ, on the exchanges here in the United States. It is a U.S. company. But that day, my cup of coffee that I bought Starbucks did not count in American GDP. Why? It was not made in the United States. It was made in China. Counted in Chinese GDP. It doesn't matter who owns the company. It matters where it was produced. Now I'm going to step on some controversial stuff here, and I'm not trying to be I'm not trying to be political about it. I'm doing it for a point because there's a point of confusion that I want to disabuse you of by doing this. So it's not a political act. that I'm doing, but I want you to understand what I'm doing. Now, remember, that's the expenditure side. There's another way of looking at this, and that's income. So I understand kind of the world of illegal immigrants a bit in the United States. One of my best friends worked for years in the United States illegally. They came legally, fell in love, overstayed their visa, got married, but never trued up with the immigration system, were technically illegal and could be deported. They were Irish, like me. Now, they were never caught. They eventually went back to Ireland. But they worked for over 20 years as a school teacher. They were Irish citizens, not U.S. citizens. Their paycheck counted towards Ireland normally, or did it? Because the work as they were a school teacher was done on U.S. dirt, it counted for U.S. GDP. So when you look at the income and the paycheck and the work that's done, it doesn't matter whether you are legal or illegal. It doesn't matter at all. What matters is the dirt upon which the work is done. Okay? So illegal immigrants that work on farms or legal immigrants that work on farms, there's no distinction. The value of their labor counts equally. Okay. So the idea of GDP at this stage is you measure GDP for 1 year, you measure it for another year, and okay, great. If 1 year is greater than the other, in theory, you're better off in the year that's higher. All right, so here we go. Final goods and services, intermediate goods. Now, here comes the question. Professor Yoder, that's great if you have fully sourced items that are totally designed and made and everything in one country. But that's a little prima donna-ish. Almost everything that we have has an international supply chain. You mentioned tires a minute ago. The rubber for the tires probably came from Southeast Asia, not from the United States. You mentioned the coffee. That probably came from Asia or Africa or Latin America. That didn't come from the United States. How do you account for GDP when something isn't fully designed and made in one country? That's a good question. And the answer is this value-added approach. So here's how this works for value add. Here we have retail sale for gasoline. These are hypothetical numbers. So we're going to assume each of these 4 steps are done in different countries. You got to drill the oil, you got to refine it to gasoline, you got to ship it to the market, and you got to sell it to the retail gas pump. So let's say the oil was drilled in Saudi Arabia. That $3 gets added to Saudi Arabian GDP. Then the refiner refines it into gasoline. Now it's worth $3.30. So the additional value, the extra 30 cents, let's say that was done in the United Arab Emirates. That gets added to their GDP. And let's say the shipping was done by a British shipping company in the United Kingdom. So that adds another 30 cents. So this 30 cents would go to the United Kingdom. And lastly, the retail sale here in the United States, that 40 cents would go to the United States. So you divvy up the amount as you go along. So for those of you who travel internationally, you're having PTSD right now. And this is a landing card for U.S. Customs and Border Protection. And notice here it says for residents, you have to put in the dollar value of everything you declare that you're bringing in. And then if you're a business, there's another form. And what they're doing is this. So if you're selling Irish tea, you declare how much it was when it came into the border Then you sell it, and the difference there gets added to US GDP. But this is one of the places where they get the information that they use it for. Now, GDP is interested in new or current production, stuff that's produced. Old output does not count in GDP. Yes. Kind of. So imagine I went up to my attic and I took out my old Nintendo Entertainment System. You know, the one with Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt? You know, the cartridges, and you had to blow in the cartridge. Remember that? To blow the dust out or whatever. You know, the spit-infused cartridges at this stage that have spit from God knows how many people that have been dried and caked on those things for, how long. You know, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game, the Battletoads. Some of you are like having major flashbacks, nostalgia right now. Right? Metroid, the original Metroid, Contra, not even the Super Contra, normal Contra, up, down, left, right, B, A, yeah, right? If I were to take that out, take the games, and I went over to eBay, and I sold it on eBay, would it count in GDP? Well, no, it wasn't made this year. It was made way back when I got it, right? However, even though it's a used good, and the good itself wouldn't count in GDP, a lot of times when you sell stuff, there's accoutrement or add-on transactions that do. For example, if I listed it on eBay, eBay's charging me a listing fee for the auction service. That counts in GDP because that was a service that was provided this year. Somebody wins the auction and I have to ship it to them. So I have to buy a box that was made this year. I have to buy packing material that was made this year, and I have to pay for shipping to them that was produced and serviced this year. So even though my NES system with all the spit-infused cartridges, the item itself doesn't count. The sale-to-use transaction had accoutrements or had other things attached to it that do. Like when you sell a used car, right? The car itself doesn't count, but you're probably going to get the car washed before you do. That counts in GDP. You're probably going to fix anything that's broken on the car, and any of the parts that were produced this year would definitely count in GDP, right? So sometimes just because it might be an older item doesn't mean there's not an element of it that counts in GDP. Now this is the might change hands. This is the, it gets me upset every time. This is the paper goods, the veterans benefits, Social Security. That's what the second bullet point is. I'm sorry about that. Now there's another way of counting called GNP. GNP is very similar to GDP. Okay, but in GNP, it doesn't matter where you make the good, it matters who owns it. So by contrast, my cup of coffee in Beijing counts for US GNP, but China's GDP. My friend's paycheck working in the United States as a school teacher counts in US GDP, but Ireland's GNP. They're an Irish citizen. Okay? Now, GDP and GNP usually track each other. I might have some additional information for you on that later, but just there is another way of looking at it. Now, whenever you calculate GDP, there are two ways of doing it. The first is the expenditure approach. Now, I expect you to wonk the expenditure approach. Do you guys know what the word wonk means? Oh, so-and-so is such a wonk. It's kind of DC speak. You hear that a lot when you hang out in DC. Wonks are people that know it so well, they know it, K-N-O-W. So well, they know it backwards, W-O-N-K. That's a wonk. I expect you to wonk the expenditure approach. I need you to know it upways, downways, backways, leftways, rightways, completely. The other way is the income approach. Here's what I expect you to know about the income approach for this class. Number one, there is an income approach. Number two, it includes income. I know that's shocking. Your paycheck, the rent your landlord gets, interest, profits for businesses. There you go. And then number three, in the end, the income and the expenditure approach match. Circular flow diagram. If you can know those three things, you're good for the purposes of this class. So this is your equation. You're going to love this equation. This is your favorite thing. This is your GDP equation. GDP is equal to C plus I plus G plus your exports minus your imports. Now C is consumption. More on that in a minute. I is investment. Don't worry about this long term. It's investment. G is government. Don't worry about the rest of this. It's just government. And then exports minus imports. So here we go. Let's go through this. C is the largest and most stable component of GDP. It's roughly around 70%. In 2017, it was 69.1. That's about right. I is pretty unstable, more on that in a minute. Here's your government. And notice exports minus imports, that means we're importing more than we're exporting. There we go. So C, consumption. Generally speaking, if you and I buy it, it goes into C. My cup of coffee, C. A new computer, C. Stuff for my video games, C. Right? Your college tuition, C. That's consumption. Consumption is pretty stable. Whenever there's a U.S. recession on, we check consumption. As long as it's about 70%, we're pretty good. But if consumption breaks, that's usually a sign of a really major issue. So whenever there's a recession, one of the ways economists look to see is it going to be really bad is we look at C. And as long as C is hanging in there around 70%, all right. It's bad, but it's not too bad. Now I is investment. Now this is the only thing that you and I buy is a brand newly built home. And there are special rules for it, but beyond that, I is purchased by businesses. Now, we got to be careful here. There's a difference between I investment and an intermediate good. So if we go to Starbucks, right, and I go buy a cup of coffee at Starbucks, the coffee beans, the cups, are an intermediate good. That cup is sold to me in another form. The coffee beans are an input in the production process. It's sold to me in another form. That's an intermediate good. But the espresso machine the barista uses to make my coffee, that's I. Starbucks is the final consumer of that espresso machine. Now, they may sell it as a used good later if they close down the place or whatever, but that espresso machine is I. Starbucks is the consumer of it. So the difference between intermediate goods, the coffee beans, and the espresso machine, planned investment. Okay. Now, if you go back to post-World War II, and you look at recessions. Remember, 2 quarters of negative GDP growth. And you go through the equation here as to what's causing GDP to go down, and it's got to be something in here. Planned investment, I, has actually been the cause of the majority of recessions in the United States. I drops. That's usually what triggers the recession. Not always. There are other things that can do it. But more often than not, it's I. So I is the most unstable component in GDP. Now, this is going to matter later in the third part of the class. GDP is your final sales plus business inventories. I'll talk about that when we do aggregate supply and aggregate demand and fiscal policy. So hang into this, keep a book note in here. You're not going to need this as much for your second exam, but you're definitely going to need it for your third. So keep this in mind. We'll talk about it later. I also includes your depreciation, everything you need in accounting, not a problem. Now G. G is government spending by federal, state, local, it's G. New York City hires new police officers, G. U.S. federal government decides to build a new destroyer at Bath Iron Works in Maine, G. They finally fixed the potholes in I-5, G. Marion County and Polk County hire new school teachers, G. Now ready for it. You build the wall, G. You fully fund the Affordable Care Act, G. You got me? If the government spends it and it's produced in the United States, it's G. Notice I am deliberately walking on landmines for both political parties. But I don't like that. Doesn't matter whether you like it or not. If it's going out of the Treasury and it's produced in the United States, it's G. We decide to add another division to the U.S. Marine Corps, G. We decide to fully fund college education through Pell Grants, G. Okay? This isn't about the political spending priorities. This is about the money is going out. It gets counted. Doesn't matter if it's the federal, state, or the local government. Now, lastly is net exports. These are exports minus imports. Exports are produced here and sold in to another country. Our major exports are generally food, agriculture, intellectual property, think Hollywood, think Microsoft, energy. Yeah, we export energy all the time. Heavy machinery, think John Deere and Caterpillar, right? You can include some autos in the heavy machinery category, but generally we're talking about construction equipment and farm equipment. Tend to be pretty big there, all right? Produced here and sold abroad. Imports are the inverse. They are made overseas and consumed here. So if you walk over from where I'm sitting right now, over to the kitchen, walk in my front door, turn left, go to my kitchen right now, you will find two, not one, two separate types of butter. There is my butter, which is made in Ireland, and I have brought over to the United States that I like. It is an import. It does not count on GDP. Why? It was not made here. Comes off GDP, goes on to Ireland's GDP. And then there's the family's butter. And they buy whatever. I think they use Tillamook. And woe unto anybody who touches my butter unauthorized. One time a year, I benevolently allow my butter to be used for Christmas cookies. Once. Other than that, hands off, buy your own butter. Made overseas, made in another country, and consumed here. All right, income approach, your paycheck, income of unincorporated businesses, rents from your property owners, corporate profits, etc. So here we go. Here's your national income. Now I want to point out something for a second. Let's go back. Consumption 69.1% of GDP in 2017. How much are paychecks? 62.1. We consume more than we get in wages. I want you to grasp for a second. If you are not living below your means and taking the extra money to invest in stocks, rental properties, bonds, etc., you're only getting 62. In 2017, you only got 62 cents on every dollar that was possible. And the United States consumes more than we earn in our wages. At least we did in 2017. Okay. Now, we're going to put some adjectives. We have GDP, we're going to put some adjectives. Remember when I said one of the ways GDP is trying to answer we're better off, are we better off? One of the ways of looking at it is intertemporally, one year versus another. But we got a problem here. If 2020 is higher than 2019 in GDP, is it because we're making more, we have more, and things are better? Or is it because prices just went up and we're all getting a head fake and it's just inflation? So nominal GDP measures GDP in whatever the prices were in the year you're measuring. So nominal GDP in 2019 uses 2019 prices. Nominal GDP in 2020 uses 2020 prices. Nominal GDP in 1950 uses 1950 prices. Right? They use current dollars. But real GDP locks out the price issue and says, we're going to pick a year and we're going to use all those prices. So real GDP uses something called a base year. You pick a year and you use that year. So in my hand is my iPhone. It's several years old. I have an iPhone 7. I'm probably going to upgrade the batteries again. I've already replaced the battery once, and I'm not going to do it again. I'm probably going to upgrade my iPhone. So if you're comparing iPhones, for example, in 2020 with an iPhone in 2019, you know what? They're probably pretty close. So you could pick one of the prices and, you know, give or take, you're probably pretty close. But what if you're comparing 2020 with 1990, where they didn't even have a smartphone? The iPhone wasn't in existence yet. In 1990, I mean, this is like early Nokia days, actually before the Nokia. You're talking the radio cell phone. Oh God, those horrible things. The backpack, or 95, where you have the big those huge Nokias. Oh God, I hated those things. My iPhone's effectively a computer. It's got internet access. I get my email on it. I can stream. It's a TV. It's a music player. It has everything. It's effectively a computer. And I'm going to compare that against a dumb phone that its only notable thing is it's a cordless phone that you can use outside your house. We're going to call them both cell phones, and which price do you use for that? So notice, the farther you get away in time, the more this fixed year procedure, base year, breaks down. But as long as you're pretty close, it's not bad. So here we have 2 years, year 1, year 2. Here's goods Alpha Bravo Charlie. Why are they Alpha Bravo Charlie? Because we're economists and we're devoid of all possible imagination, and therefore we choose Alpha Bravo Charlie rather than pizza, pretzels, and beer because that might actually relate to college students. No, we use Alpha Bravo Charlie because we couldn't imagine anything else going in there. So here's the quantity produced in year 1. Here's the quantity produced in year 2. Here's the column 3 is the prices in year 1. Column 4 is the prices in year 2. Now column 5 is your nominal GDP in year 1. So this is price 1, column 3, times quantity 1, column 1. So 6 times 50 cents is $3. 7 times 30 cents is $2.10, and 10 times 70 cents is $7. You add these numbers up for all 3 goods, and you come to $12.10. So in this simple 3-good economy, nominal GDP in year 1 is $12.10. Likewise, in column 8, that's nominal GDP in year 2. So that's production in year 2 times prices in year 2. 11 times 40 cents is $4.40. 4 times $1 is $4. 12 times 90 cents, $10.80. Add them up together, $19.20. Now, you do this math. This is $7.10 increase off of a $12 base. That's about 60%. If your GDP is going up 60%, everything is awesome. Oh my God, everybody's rich. Let's throw the party. Next year will be more awesome, right? But wait a minute, that's nominal GDP. Is it really so awesome, or did we get a head fake? So there are 2 ways of doing real GDP. This is real GDP. It's production year 2 using year 1 prices. So production year 2, 11 times 50 cents is $5.50. 4 times 30 cents is $1.20. 12 times 70 cents is $8.40. Add them up. That's $3 off of a $12 base. That's 25%. It's very different than a 60% GDP. The other way is GDP production in year 1 with year 2 prices. Okay. So year 1, 6 times 40 cents is $2.40. 7 times $1 is $7. 10 times 90 cents is $9. Add it together. This is 80 cents off of an $18 base. That's what, 2%? That's a big difference. Now notice in these prices, not every price went up, but on aggregate, you're getting an inflation effect. This 60% jump here in nominal GDP is a head fake. We're not 60% better off. We're somewhere between 2 and 25% better off. Yeah, some things went up, some things went down. We are a little better off, but it's not 60% better off. Now, the book doesn't do very good at talking about it. So I'm giving you this bonus slide. Make sure you get this in your notes. There's a tool called the GDP deflator. It's a measure to use for inflation. It's a number. You generate the GDP deflator for different years, and you use that to kind of figure out how much inflation is affecting so you can correct GDP numbers, nominal GDPs. To do the GDP deflator, to generate it, you take nominal GDP for the year that you're interested in, you divide it by real GDP, and you multiply it by 100. Nominal divided by real times 100. So back at this slide, nominal GDP in year 2 is 1920. Real GDP in year 2, using year 1 prices, is 1510. 1920 divided by 1510 times 100, that would be your GDP deflator number. Generally, the base year is always going to be 100 because nominal and real are going to be the same. whichever year you're picking for your prices. So if you're picking year one for your prices, nominal GDP for year one is 1210. Real GDP for year one is 1210. Any number divided by itself is itself. So the base year is 100. If you're going forward in years, the number tends to be greater than 100. If you're going backwards in time, it tends to be less than 100. Now, professional economists prefer the GDP deflator over other inflation metrics, bluntly, because it uses everything in GDP. You can't accuse an economist of cherry picking certain sectors of the economy or certain parts of the economy. Oh, you favor consumers over producers, or you favor wholesale over retail, or urban over rural. It's everything in GDP. So you're not accused of getting cute with inflation numbers. Now the symbol pi in macroeconomics means the inflation rate. Inflation rate between year one and year two. You take whatever inflation index you're using. GDP deflator is one index. So you take, for example, you take the GDP deflator in year two, subtract the GDP deflator in year one, and divide that difference by the GDP deflator in year one. That'll give you an inflation rate between years one and two. So it could be the GDP deflator, it could be the CPI, it could be the PPI. There are lots of different indices you could use in here. But that's how you calculate inflation. This is the argument that many things have changed in the US economy, and the farther back you go, the worse the comparisons get. Now, let's talk for a minute about GDP. GDP is meant to answer the question, are we better off? And it's imperfect. A couple years ago, my car got broken into. Stole my stuff. I had a spare kit of clothes in the boot of my car. I had major winter gear. I had stabilizers. I had all kinds of stuff. Got in, ripped it all off. I had to replace it all. And by me replacing it all, GDP went up. But I would argue I'm not better off for having replaced it. In fact, I'd rather not have had to replace it. If crime goes down, society is better off. But if crime goes down, that's not an increase in GDP. Likewise, time off. If I take time off from work, I may be happier, maybe an increase in social welfare, but that's not going to show up in GDP. You also have the non-market stuff. So I want you to think about this. Imagine you have children, right? If grandma watches the kids, that doesn't count in GDP. But if you take the kid to daycare, it does. So one counts, the other don't. But the same service is being produced. Junior's getting watched for a day while you go to work, right? So we got a whole measurement problem that some things count and some things don't, even though the same activity is being produced. And then the last bullet point is kind of the Bernie Sanders argument, okay? But what about the distribution of output or income in society? What if one person has all of it and everybody else is poor? Yes, GDP does not capture that. We're not claiming it does, okay? GDP is meant to be the whole pie argument. If you care about distributional arguments, GDP is not the tool for you. We've got other tools that you can use. So please do not get hung up on but what about the distribution argument? We acknowledge that's a limitation of GDP. Okay. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate your time. Next time we're going to do unemployment and inflation. That's going to be a pretty long lecture. There's, again, a lot of nuance in it. So please take your time with this. Let me know if you have questions, and give me a call or come to office hours. Thank you much. Have a good day.